just a few days ago. So from squash to this stage, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Emmett Carson. Podium is yours.
Well, good evening. Ken, thank you for those very kind and over-generous remarks. I hope my wife was listening. I want to recognize the, as we would say, Lieutenant Governor, if I've got that right. And wasn't the DJD Center group just phenomenal? And I want to recognize and give them a hand. That was tremendous. We need them in our community. I want to thank Eva for this very kind introduction to be with you today, this invitation to be with you today. It's fabulous. She said she was having a small gathering of friends, and could I come be here today? And it's a very small gathering. So thank you for that, and for the tour that you provided me with of this wonderful community. I was able to go see Fort Calgary, and I was able to see Studio Bell, and they are phenomenal institutions. I also want to acknowledge, as was done earlier, Ian Bird, CEO of the Community Foundations of Canada. Ian has become a good friend. He was very helpful in a conference that we had some 2 weeks ago in Silicon Valley on innovation. And Ian was both on the advisory committee, assembled a delegation of community foundations to come, and was also on a plenary panel. So, Ian, thank you very much for your help. And that's worth an applause. And I want to assure the 20 or so Community Foundation colleagues who are here, who will be at an event tomorrow, what I say tonight, I won't say tomorrow. So I'll be looking for you tomorrow. That's right. I'll be looking for you tomorrow. So I understand that I am an unlikely choice to be the speaker tonight. I don't know a lot about Canada. I know less than I used to know. I used to be in Minnesota, so occasionally I would get some information. But now I virtually get no information. And when I told my wife that I had accepted to come do this speech tonight, she said, "Why you?" Now, she said it in a loving way, but she said, "Why you?" And I suspect that some of you, in a not so loving way, may be saying, "Why you?" So let me tell you what I told my wife. She smirked a little bit, but she's always smirking at something that I have to say. And what I told her was that where Eva really left off is where I want to start, because I've done a lot of thinking about how globalization and technology are going to impact place-based institutions, particularly community foundations. And I want to share some of those insights with you, talk about what they mean, and I think that's why I was invited. At least that's what I tell my wife. And I hope that's what you're hoping I'll talk about, because when I was first told about the title of the conference, my working title in the office was that shift happens. Now, does that work with all of you? All right. I want to do 3 things. First, I want to convince you that we are on the cusp of a new age that will have a profound impact on how everyone everywhere lives, works, and plays. The magnitude of this shift, this transformation for me, is the difference between when we discovered electricity and the time before we discovered electricity. It is that profound. It will be that life-altering. It will have those kinds of repercussions. And by and large, the nonprofit sector and philanthropy, we aren't talking about it. We aren't talking about it in the sense of the scope in which it will hit and impact our work at a fundamental level. To the extent that we think about it, we say, well, we've got a Facebook page. That isn't what I'm talking about. That's number one. Number two, I want to describe the journey that my own institution, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, went through in trying to think about this new globalized world and technology and how we have started along a path. We're not at the end of the journey. We're at the start of the journey. But I think how we got there has implications for the Calgary Foundation, for your local nonprofits, and for nonprofits and foundations around the world. And then lastly, I want to talk about the role of community foundations and how, in particular, we, those institutions, have an opportunity for leadership in this changing world. Now, some of what I'm going to say is going to challenge some of you. That's okay, my plane leaves in the morning. But I hope that you take what I say as an invitation to start the discussion. Not to debate, did he get it right, or is that part fixed, or I don't agree with how he framed it. That's okay. But did I help encourage a discussion and a thinking to say that what we need to do is more than talk about how we get a Facebook page or start to tweet? That the implications are much larger and much more profound. And if I'm able to do that, I will have accomplished my task tonight. Okay, so let's get going. The technological changes that are underway, these transformations are all around us every day. But what happens is they come so subtly. They come into our lives so easily. We don't recognize them as representing the shift that they will have on us over time. What do I mean by that? Well, I remember when I went to the grocery store and there were actually people who checked me out of the store. And now there's a scanner and I self-check out. I remember when I used to go to the gas station and people used to come and fill the car up. And now I put my own check in. I remember when I used to go to the airport and I get a ticket and I check out of the lot, and there was somebody and they ran my ticket and we exchanged money and they opened up the gate, and that person isn't there anymore. And overnight, all of the people who did those jobs don't do those jobs anymore. They're gone. We were driving around today, and Eva pulled up, and she pulled out her cell phone, and she clicked some stuff, and she paid for parking. And someplace, somebody who used to go around, I presume here, and check a meter to see if it had turned red or not, doesn't do that anymore. in the same way. And that's what happens when we have this technology. Some of you now worry about your steps. See, some of you get that, some of you don't. Right? Some of you get that. And we're obsessed over how many steps we got in. Because we're walking and we've got our Fitbit or we've got our smartphone or whatever it is. And it's monitoring our heart rate and it's monitoring our sleep cycle. And soon it's going to upload and go to your doctor and no, but it will. And some people say, what are the steps things? It's exercise. It's when you walk. We have camera phones that are ubiquitous and have put out of business the need for film and development. Remember, you used to take it, and when can I get it back? And the 1 hour film development was the big breakthrough, 1 hour. And it's instantaneous. And I don't buy a photo album anymore because it's in the cloud album. What happened to the jobs and the people who made film, who processed it, who did lenses, who worked to do it in 1 hour and put it into things and made the photo albums? And yet we didn't ask any of those questions. They went away. That's what I mean by it's subtle. It's easy. It's fun. And I don't say that to leave you with the impression that it's a bad thing. I say it to leave you with the impression our world is rapidly changing every day. And it's having profound implications. I used to be wedded to my newspaper. And now it's on my smartphone. I don't get magazines anymore. They're downloaded. I carry around 20 books on my tablet that I can click. And yet the people who used to work in those industries that printed it, produced it, brought it to me, those jobs are disappearing. Are you with me? Are you understanding that, yeah, it's fun, but we aren't having the kind of dialogues that we need to have? 3D printers that can now, they only cost $2,000 now for the simplest 3D printer. Some people say, now what's that? Well, it's Star Trek. It's the original. Or the new one, but for the original. Remember the replicator? And you could go to the replicator and say, make it, whatever it is. And it would go, zzz, and then you go, I got it. That's what a 3D printer is. It's a replicator. And in ways I can't hope to describe to you, you code it, you design it, and you go click, and you walk away, and whatever you design gets created and made. Now, these 3D printers are being used to create prosthetic arms and hands for disabled people. You can make one for about $300. Now, for a child that has a disability like that, by conventional means, that prosthetic can cost up to $7,000 to $8,000. And as the kid grows in spurts, those of you who have kids know, you've got to get 2 or 3 in a given year at $7,000 to $8,000 a pop. Now think about a machine you can have in your house or in a doctor's office and it's $300. What that means for a community. Or one of the deepest, toughest problems with homelessness, with people who are homeless, is around foot care because they get ill-fitting shoes. Think about a 3D printer that can map a person's foot exactly and give them an indestructible Croc-like shoe. Right? Enormous opportunities are in front of us. And yet, as a sector in general, we aren't thinking about how we even use these tools. I've yet to get a grant from a nonprofit saying we want to get a $2,000 3D printer to do something with it. Never got that. Even have you got that? She hasn't gotten that request. And yet, it's established technology. It's not, you can buy them. Profound implications. But all of those implications aren't good. Right? So every day in Silicon Valley, sometimes 3-4 times a day, but at least every day, I see a driverless car. See it being tested. There are all kinds of driverless cars. There's not one type, multiple types. Now, some of you think, oh, that's way off. Now, you watch TV, you see the commercials, they're getting you ready. You see the commercial, the car can stop itself? Yes? Maybe some of you, I can't see you. Have you seen? I got to hear you because I get the lights. Okay. Have you seen the commercial where the car parks itself? Have you seen the newest commercial where the car can follow the other car and the driver can take their hands off the wheel if it's on the highway? Because it follows right behind it. Now, if it can stop, if it can park, if it can follow the car in front, what do you call that? A driverless car. The components are there. Ford and the ride-sharing company Lyft are already testing prototype cars in the United States and hope to launch next year. Now, the upside is huge, right? For everybody who's a parent, think for a moment. Boy, I get the kid up in the morning, get them dressed, put them in the driverless car. They get to school. I get to have my coffee, do some emails. Car swings back around, picks me up. What's wrong with that? For somebody who has a disability, sight impaired or other physical disability, the idea of the mobility that they will have. Seniors who no longer feel they should or their kids won't let them drive for all of the rest of us can now get out and go to things again. It'll be powerful. But think about the implications. In the U.S., it's estimated that almost 1 in 5 men are engaged in something that involves driving for work. 1 in 5. In the trucking industry, for example, there's some 3.5 million people who are professional truck drivers. There's another 5.2 million who work in the trucking industry but not driving the trucks. What happens to the economy when those jobs go away? It'll be safer. Drivers won't be falling asleep. It's more efficient. Companies can run the trucks 24 hours. They pull into the gas station, fill up, hit the road. They're on GPS. What happens to our local communities when you don't need a delivery truck anymore. This is not if it will happen, right? It's not an if it will happen. It's happening. And guess what? None of you get to vote on it, right? It's not a vote. It's not something you get to say, well, I don't want that here. It's going to that's evolution. The question we have to grapple with is, as institutions that care about our community, how do we take full advantage of the upsides that are amazing, enormous, tremendous, and at the same time raise the thorny, challenging questions about the downside, about software programs that are set up in ways that carry out the discrimination that most of us want to eliminate in the regular workplace. What's he talking about? So there's some of these programs for applying for jobs. And they weed out people who don't have the right names or came from certain zip codes where we know something about those zip codes. One of the big things, and I'm not knocking on anybody when I use a name here, I'm just telling you the kinds of implications. That it's a bit scandal in the U.S. Somebody said, I want to Google 5 white boys, right? Caucasians, I'll be political, they're white, right? And they were nice, preppy, smiling. They said 5 black boys. There were criminal mugshots that came up. I kid you not. Google it, and you'll just do, controversy over Googling 5 teenagers. It matters. These programs, these algorithms have implications that matter for the kind of community we're going to have and that we want. Give you another example. I got to watch the time, Eva, because Eva, okay, boy, I'm way behind. I got to speed up. Okay. So, you go into the restroom, do whatever you're going to do, you come out to wash your hands, and it's the automatic dispenser. Well, turns out African Americans are people who have dark skin. It doesn't work so well. You're sort of doing like this if some of you have, and the soap doesn't come out. Well, it turns out the design team, the way it works is there's light coming out that you can't see. And the light is based on what breaks the light. Well, the way it's calibrated is darker skin doesn't register as having broken the light, because there were no people of color on the design testing team. So it all worked when they did it. Send it to market. These things have profound implications for community. So let me speed up. I get carried away sometimes. So I'm gonna move it along. So let me just talk a little bit about Silicon Valley Community Foundation and why I've had to think a lot about some of these issues. I assume all of you have heard of Silicon Valley? Okay, but can any of you find it on a map? I mean, think about that for a minute. It's known all over the world, and yet you cannot find it on a map. It has no mayor. The people who live there don't agree on its geographical boundaries and what's in and what's out. And yet, people come to visit us and they say, we're the Silicon Valley of Argentina, and we're the Silicon Valley of Japan, and we're the Silicon... I'm like, do you have a name to it? Can I find it on a map? Yeah, it's this area right here. You can't do that in Silicon Valley, California. And it was this conundrum when I was hired to be the founding CEO 10 years ago that led me to have to think very deeply about what community means, right? What does community really mean in a place that I cannot find on the map? And I've always believed that the very best community foundations serve the interests of the local donors in that community. Well, the donors in my community, however defined, come from every place else around the nation and the world to be in this tech space. And so they have interest at home, nationally, and around the world. And in so following what my local donors needed their community foundation to be, sent us on a path of exploration. So let me give you a little bit of context. And as Ken mentioned, we started at $1.4 billion. Today, we're $7.3 billion. Last year, we granted $821 million by making 12,800 grants, and we raised last year $1.2 billion. Okay? Thank you. Of that 821 million, 358 million went locally, 394 million went nationally, and $27 million went to 70 countries internationally. Okay? Now bear with me. Thought you might be interested to know we made 68 grants totaling $1.4 million to Canadian nonprofit organizations. Okay? And I say that to say, in my community, people say, well, why somebody giving grants in Canada? They ought to be giving those grants right here. They ought to be local. We've got widening income inequality. We've got a housing shortage. We've got transportation congestion. We've got deep and profound problems. An educational system that's broken. And yet the nature of my community is both and. It's people who live in multiple places, right? And we all wear multiple hats. We're parents. We're male or female. We college educated. We're in all kinds of different groups. We have different religious affiliations, different ethnic affiliations, all kinds of different things, and we hold those things all in one vessel ourselves very comfortably. They're not in conflict for me to be African American and male. I never argue about that once in my life. And yet we create such a conflict with this notion of you're either with us and local or you're against us and you're not local. Right? And we don't allow that people can be both and. That they can be a great local citizen and they can be a citizen of the world. And that's what Silicon Valley Community Foundation is trying to test the limits of that both and proposition. That you can be who you want to be. That you can belong in whatever number of communities you want to belong to. And we will facilitate that giving. And I think that's the challenge that every community foundation will face. And many local organizations will also face. Let me keep to my script here because I'm going to get the boot in a minute. Okay. Let me see where I am. Now, you say, how are local organizations going to do that? I was at Fort Calgary and Studio Bell. And I would argue that they are advancing. They don't frame it this way. They say, oh, God, really? He said that in front of everybody? Let me say, they didn't say this. I, as a quick visitor, watching and listening, ascribe this to them. But they are both they are both deeply rooted in this community. But they are also keenly aware that the work that they do have national implications, have international implications. When Studio Bell, we're doing some things. We're the first ever sort of rock and roll, the Hall of Fame for music. They understand it's not the Hall of Fame for Calgarians. It's the Hall of Fame for Canada. It's the Hall of Fame for people who want to come to Canada. It's bigger than just Calgary, right? I went there, I'm seeing Miles Davis and other people on the board. It's not just Calgarians, I hate to tell you. When I'm at the fort and they're talking about this is a Canadian landmark for the mounted police. It is a Canadian place of deep spiritual importance for Native peoples, far predating the arrival of the mounted police. That's a bigger thing than just Calgary. So again, I want to argue the implications of these things, this both and, is not just a Silicon Valley community foundation thing. So let me try to bring this all together. Humanity is struggling with how do we have a shared sense of destiny. We're at this precipice, and we're trying to figure out globally how are we going to make it work, right? So the Ebola virus that was in Africa was a world threat, and we had donors who wanted to work on that threat in Africa. And as I remind people who tell me, you only ought to be local in Silicon Valley in the place that I can't find on the map, that I don't know where it is, you ought to be local. So we should have waited till the Ebola virus got here before we tried to do something about it. Right? The environmental issues, the water shortages that will be coming are going to be world-class issues. The famines that are predicted and are happening are going to be world issues. As economies get this displacement of jobs, we see in other economies today the absence of jobs and meaningful work and the destabilization, not just in the Middle East, but in places like the United Kingdom. We have an opportunity to get in front of this or have it happen to us. The option isn't to say it's not going to happen. You with me? So what you're doing with vital signs across the country in collaboration with government and this notion of belonging, that everybody is a part of it. Everybody needs to fit in, stemming from the truth and reconciliation that you did with indigenous and Aboriginal peoples, is so important for the world. The expansion of that, as I understand it from Ian, the 15 or so community foundations around the world, in the U.S. and the United Kingdom and New Zealand and Australia, is what community foundations have to learn to do better in expressing leadership that is both and. Local in terms of being important to your local community, but inclusive that it is global and transportable to other communities. And to tell you how important it is, I want to contrast that very quickly to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. Because you've seen the horrible cascade of videos. where unarmed black men and women are murdered with no repercussions to the police involved. And you see it. And I haven't seen that videotape of white people being shot. Haven't seen that videotape. Haven't seen that videotape of Asians being shot. Haven't seen that videotape of any number of groups. There's been one group consistently and in cities across the country. And because of our inability to have a truth and reconciliation effort, to talk about America's history with what we call that peculiar institution, slavery, where people were treated like chattel, beaten, sold, raped, murdered, property, and the implications of that. We can't talk about the questions raised by the nonviolent, peaceful Black Lives Matter movement. We try to delegitimize it by saying, well, all lives matter. Well, all lives aren't being shot dead by some police officers acting in ways that no one should be able to support. And the Community Foundation response is an individual response. I have some colleagues that are working mightily in their local communities to create the kind of dialogue and reconciliation that is necessary to heal and move forward. And I have other colleagues where these incidents have happened to whom you have to point out that it happened and ask what are they doing, and they really don't have a response. And certainly we don't have a collective response. It's not on any Community Foundation meeting agenda. Well, what are we going to do about the Black Lives Matter movement, and how do we think about that, and how do we think about it in terms of fairness and social justice and the morality of where the country is going, and don't we have a leadership role? So what you're doing here, the Calgary Foundation, the Canadian community foundations that are participating, and those around the world, for me is an important model that will provide both inspiration but also opportunities to deal with these even bigger issues, or equally as large issues, as globalization and technology. Thank you so very much for having someone south of the border come and spend a little time with you. And I will tell my wife that all of you had the same reaction. Why'd you invite him? Thank you so much.
Dr. Emmett Carson, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. You'll notice I haven't shaken your hand because mine's slightly dirty as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for some questions. The way this is going to work is there are a couple of microphones out in the crowd. Lauren's got one. Matt has got one there. Where's Lauren? There's Lauren. Thank you for wearing dark clothes. That's great. If you have a question for Dr. Carson, we've only got about 10 minutes or so. This is an engaged audience that was very interesting and challenging, and you raised some amazing, profound points. So I want to make sure that you get your opportunity to ask a question. Go right up to the mic. There we go.
Thank you very much for coming to speak today. Question, for those of us that are more interested in learning a little bit more about what you've written, what would be your top 3 publications that we could read?
Honestly, I don't have a top 3. There's some articles that I think are meaningful. They tend to be the most recent things that I've written because that's top of mind. I've written a lot lately, 2 or 3 articles on the meaning of community for community foundations and how I think our business model is fundamentally broken So that's one strain. I've written a lot on African American philanthropy over 30 years. I have a book on that as well called The Hand Up, and that's sort of another strain of work, but I'm very proud of the writings in that area and of that book. So I don't have like the favorite. I'm an old dog, and so I've got a lot of cubby holes that I run down occasionally, but thank you.
Dr. Carson, you need to know that question was asked by John Cornish, one of the greatest football players this country has ever produced.
All right.
Just so you know.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Yes,
We've
sir.
got another question over here.
Over here. Okay. You direct.
Hi, thank you very much for that brilliant way of talking. I really appreciate that. My question is, so you're in a unique community, a global community essentially. I'm assuming that you're not experiencing pushback about going global, but I imagine many of us in here are. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on how we might have to deal with that, trying to go outside of our own communities, or explaining why we should?
Oh, I get enormous pushback, right? But let me tell you, it's called disruption. Disruption isn't gentle. Disruption isn't easy. Leadership is hard. I'm convinced by the growth that we've experienced, by the donors who've come, and that we're following their interests, that we're on the right path. As I try to say, I don't know where, we're just at the start. I don't know where it's leading. I don't know where it goes. And that's part of the anxiety, right? I believe this new technology is going to create a whole lot of new jobs. A whole lot of new jobs. I don't know what they are. I don't know the names of them. I don't know what you should do today to get ready for that new job. But that's what it was like when we invented electricity. I didn't know there'd be transistors. I didn't know there'd be light bulb factories. I didn't know, right? People couldn't, we created this thing. We're not sure how it's, but we think it's important. And that's this age that we're in where I think all of us have to be translators to that and understand we're not going to always get it right, that there's going to be pushback because for 100 years or more, people haven't had to think about any place but their place. One more point on this, and I know we're short on time, but it's important. My limited understanding is that this is sort of an oil town, traditionally. Or oil is important here. Did I get that right? Okay.
Most days.
And oil is sort of depressed. Is oil a global commodity, or a Calgary commodity, or a Canadian commodity? It's a global commodity. Right? So even, you cannot separate out your economy from what's happening in the world. And the more we get people to understand, it's not a choice, it's a nuanced understanding of it's both, I think is the way forward. But as you see in my country, 30% of people, want to kick everybody out and build a wall. So doesn't make it easy.
We'll take them.
I didn't say whether they were right or wrong. You may take me depending on the results of the election.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your speech tonight. My question is about the way your very large endowment fund is built. Donor advised funds versus discretionary, and you're wanting to do a lot of very innovative and leadership oriented things. And how does that relate to your donors who might have designated or donor advised funds that want to go somewhere else? Yeah. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. How much time I have for this dissertation?
Go ahead.
Okay, so no, because it's really a great question. Because I've been known to be a little provocative from time to time. And The world is different. I mean, embedded in that question is, I think, a lot of community foundations in the U.S., I can't speak for Canada, we really wanted to act like private foundations. We wanted to say, we know all the answers. We know what's best for community. And partnership meant you give us the money and we decide where it ought to go. Fundamentally, that equation in how we do everything in the world is different. What do I mean by that? When my daughter used to go to the doctor, my wife would, she's sick, my daughter's sick with something, flu, cold, get a prescription, say, take this, you know, unless she turns purple, which is hard for a little black girl to do. You know, it's fine. And that's what we did. Now my wife takes her mother to the doctor. And the doctor says, here's the medication, here's a website to go look at it, here's my email address. My wife dutifully goes and looks up, looks at the side effects, sees another drug is also used. It may have a better outcome for her mom given other things. She emails the doctor says, hey, you know what? That's an equally good medication, happy to prescribe that instead. My wife is not a medical doctor, but she is a participant in the outcome. That's what people expect today. So this notion that donors are over here and they don't know, you didn't say this, but that some have. Donors are over here, but they don't know much. And we're here and we hold the value of the community. I don't buy into today. I believe they are partners. When I meet with people who have done things and are doing things that I can't explain, who are in their 20s, who are worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, I don't think I'm the smartest person in the room. I think maybe it's a part, they got the money and the smarts and I'm in the room. It's a partnership, so it's not they pull me off track to something. They have interests too. They Google, and they're smart folks. So I think we've got to change our model of how we think about partnering and who can be a part and how we reach consensus. And it's also not just for wealthy people, but that's what the belonging movement is all about, as I understand. There are other points of view. I'm at Fort Calgary, and I'm learning there's a whole nother history of that place that has never been surfaced, because somebody thought the repositories of the whole story was this group. And so we've got to change our thinking as foundations that a lot of people have parts of the answer and can invest in parts of the solution. And some will succeed and some will fail, but our track record wasn't 100% either. And that's challenging, and that's tough, and that's scary. But I embrace it as an opportunity. Our motto is possibilities start here. Come tell us how you want to make our community better, how you want to make the world better, and let's partner in making that happen. I don't want to deal with whatever you name the issue. Well, isn't that very small-minded for me for all of the world's problems that we need to solve? So thank you very much. That wasn't too long, Ken.
No, it was good.
Okay, all right.
I think you're certainly the smartest on the stage, I'll say that. We do have this gentleman who's been waiting for a while. We're going to give him the last question because we want to get you out on time.
It's Ken's fault.
I don't know if it's a question. It's more of a thought, I guess, or some random ideas. Because one of the things that came to me when you were talking is also the notion that we're moving into this direction can build bridges or actually recognize the bridges that are already there, but it can also widen the chasm of those who can participate and allowed to cross those bridges, right? And the other thing that came to my mind is that in Calgary, about 25% of residents come from various parts of the world. So their notion of community It's not just Calgary immediately. So I come from the Filipino community, and I know about 50 places where I could send money to the Philippines, right? And so there's that immediate link. And then we work with them on things that are important to Calgary, but sometimes we don't resonate with them on what's important to them in their sense of community as well, right? So I think there's that opportunity, but there's also that challenge of really expanding our notion of what community is and how can we be relevant, continue to be relevant to what we do here in Calgary, but also to be relevant to people's lives and their notions of a global community.
That was precisely the path that led us. We said, you know, look, we can have a donor who wants to make a grant to his or her alma mater, any place in the United States, and often around the world. But a set of donors who have another interest in an NGO someplace else around the world, we say the border stops here. And as we looked at the demand for that, we said, we've got to be their community foundation too. We have to be a both and place and not an either or place. And it was that kind of struggle that led us down the path we are, and I think that is a path that many other community foundations will have to follow. I'm going to close with saying this. I think there will also be community foundations that remain local, that they can coexist. All don't need to be one and all don't need to be other. There are many smaller community foundations within our geographical footprint that do important work, that do just fine. So we create these boundaries as if it's my turf and your turf. It can be overlapping and complementary turf. So thank you so much for your question.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Emmett Carson. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.